Hi, my name is Lauren from Mindful of Christ Ministries. Welcome to this new video. If you like the video, don't forget to like it, share it with anyone that might benefit from this, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you want to hear future videos. So today is going to be an interview style. I'm going to be talking to Sandra. She is the OCD coach. So welcome, Sandra. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lauren. Excited.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from?
I'm from Canada, the center of the country, right in the middle, in a province called Manitoba. And I just live outside our main city of Winnipeg in the country with my husband and my dog, Dakota.
Oh, lovely.
And so a little bit about me is I come from a background of 28 years of psychiatric nursing. I was a registered psych nurse for 28 years. And I also was diagnosed about that same time and 28 years ago with having OCD. So it's been a passion of mine since then, both on a personal and professional level, to go out and work with other people that may be living with OCD, anxiety, and or depression.
Wow, that's incredible. So that's quite a few years of both experience and professional and academic side of things. So that's a good mix. So I expect that works well with your clients.
Yes, it does.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing that. So for those of people that don't know what OCD is, could you just give an explanation of what it is?
Sure. OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, and it affects just over 2% of the population at some point in their life. And what it involves is it's a few things that have to be present. How we get diagnosed is through what we call a diagnostic statistics manual. It's like our psychiatric Bible, and there's certain criteria someone has to fit into in order to be diagnosed. So a couple of the main factors is it's intrusive, it's unwanted. We don't want to have these thoughts. It takes up many hours a day on average for people, and those hours are spent obsessing about something intrusive. And then the second piece to that is the compulsion. So they have to do something. We call it compulsion or ritual. Those words are used interchangeably. And someone living with OCD has to perform some type of compulsion to alleviate the anxiety. Now, the compulsion can be up mentally, but it can also be something they do outwardly, like physically. So for example, some of the more common ones are turning on and off the tap, or checking light switches or doorknobs, just to make sure that nothing bad will happen. And usually the end result of any of these rituals is to prevent something catastrophic from happening. So people can spend hours a day performing these rituals, but what people fail to recognize, and I try to emphasize when I'm working and coaching with others, is that the anxiety that is dropped is only temporary before another form of obsession comes in and takes its place, and the whole vicious cycle starts again.
Wow, that sounds like it can be intense at times.
Oh, definitely. Yes. It can be very debilitating. I know for myself, it made me housebound at one point in my life where I wasn't even able to go out of my apartment. I was confined to my apartment because the outside world seemed just so scary that I wasn't really equipped or willing to face the world. So my world started to close in smaller and smaller, to the point where it was really hard to even go down the hall to check my mail in the apartment block, or go down a flight of stairs to do laundry. So.
Wow, bless you. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was tough for quite a while until I actually came across, I was going from walk-in clinic to walk-in clinic, because I remember when I was graduating from psych nursing, that was around the time where HIV was very prevalent. And in my mind, I felt like I had developed HIV. So I was going from walk-in clinic to walk-in clinic, getting tests for HIV. And even though they were coming back negative, I could not tell my mind that I was okay. There was always that what if. And with OCD, it's what if. We use a lot of the phrase, but what if? And so most people can live with uncertainty, with very little probability of things happening, but we need to living with OCD, we want zero probability. So even if we have 99.9% guaranteed that something isn't going to happen, we latch onto that 0.1, and we're not satisfied until we get 100%. And the reality is we never do. We all have to live with uncertainty, but it's really hard to do when you have OCD.
Okay, bless you. So would that be the hardest part of OCD, or is there something else? Really?
Well, that's one aspect, and you know, everyone has different forms of OCD. I had almost every type of OCD. And so when people say, I would rather have this type of OCD than have the one I do, but really in reality, the type that you have is the worst because it's happening to you. So I really emphasize that with people, is that, you know, we all come with different types of OCD. And sometimes when we overcome one, it replaces that one with a different one. So sometimes OCD will come in through the front door, the side door, the back door. It finds its way in. It's very creative and very, very sneaky on how it presents itself. But so are we. We're very creative because we find ways to mask it. We find ways to hide it. That often people are very surprised that I have OCD. They'll say, you don't look like someone who will have OCD. But the reality is it doesn't, no mental illness discriminates, right? It affects every walk of life, every gender, every culture. So it just happens that that's what I have. And God gave me the gift of being able to go out and serve others because of it. And that's that's my main mission in life going forward, and has been since the pandemic. I want to go globally and help people around the world so that they don't have to suffer in silence.
Fantastic. And kind of steering off a little bit just now, how do you help your clients? What do you do exactly?
Yeah, I do the #1 gold standard treatment, which is called cognitive behavior therapy. It was introduced in the late 70s, so it's been going on for decades now, and it's still the #1, ranks the #1 treatment modality. And so if I was just to do now cognitive behavior therapy, if I was to talk about that just in a very simplistic form, when we look at cognitive, it's the way we think and we perceive the world. Because living with OCD, we perceive things in ways that are catastrophic often. So if we're able to change the way we think, as a result of that, it will change our behavior. We'll be able to behave different towards those thoughts. And I always like to use a phrase called thought action fusion. And I like to use my little magnet here. What happens with people with OCD is they have a thought. So on this side, look at it as this being a thought and this being an action. And as soon as we have a thought, so for example, with myself, with my hit and run OCD, if I have a thought I hit a pedestrian, the action is I did so, and they come together like a magnetic force. So what I teach people by using the #1 treatment modality called cognitive behavior therapy, changing the way we think, as a result, changing our behavior, is therapeutic. But within that treatment modality, there's a technique called ERP, and it stands for exposure response prevention. So we expose ourselves to driving. I'm just using that as an example. And we prevent ourselves from our rituals, which usually is going back and retracing our roots, checking for dents in our car, going under the vehicle, looking for blood stains, whatever it might be, to make sure, remember that 100% certainty we need, that we did not hit a pedestrian. So the thought is, I did hit a pedestrian, or did I? And so the question is here with the thought, and the action is, yes, I must have. I drove over that speed bump, but was it a speed bump or was it a person? So thought action fusion. So through ERP, exposure response prevention, I help coach people to expose themselves to the fear, whatever it may be, and allow them to sit in the uncertainty long enough to know otherwise and not do the exposure. And eventually, the gap between these two magnetic forces becomes wider and wider. So as you can appreciate, magnetic forces have to be close enough proximity to bond, right? So through ERP, I open that gap further and further for them to the point where they cannot connect no longer. So they do the exposure without doing the ritual. And over time, that anxiety will lessen. And it's a process. It's not something they do on day one. We actually formulate a list, a hierarchy list of their obsessions. So we track all the obsessions on the left side of the page. We track all the compulsions they do for that particular obsession for each one. And we rate in the middle an anxiety level. That's our subjective units of distress scale. And we start labeling the amount of anxiety with each item. And then when we're ready to do the work, after we've done the custom-made tailor program, which I love, this is probably my most favorite part, is when we get into the process of doing the work. So that OCD tracker, the obsessions and compulsions, is just the foundation so we can get started on doing the exposure work. But we can't do it without that list. So that list, I call it the foundation. And from that foundation, we can start building the walls in the house and the roof, and each bedroom, each room in that home will create an exposure list for us to work towards. And some exposures are really high. We rate them on a scale of 0 to 10 or 0 to 100, and 10 or 100 being the top of the list. Some people get very scared. They think, I'll never get to the hundreds or the 10 out of 10s. But I was the same way. I had, I think, 13 and a half pages when I started my treatment of ERP. And in the attic sat those 100 plus. And I remember saying to Dr. Rowan, I will never get to the 100 pluses. And she said, put them down, just put them down. And you know what? I reached the attic. And now I can honestly say that my OCD is 99.9% much better in most aspects of my life. And it was only because of doing the work, the hard work, because it will take hard work.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
You're welcome.
So you mentioned anxiety there and that system and how you help clients with OCD to reduce that anxiety. But is there anything else that perhaps you can tell and the listeners, how can stress and anxiety be reduced? Is there something that they could take away today?
Yes, initially the anxiety will be very, initially the anxiety is going to be very high, because what we're doing is I'm helping people coach them to do the exposure, the very thing that they've been trying to avoid, because OCD has a lot of avoidance tendencies. So the stress will get higher, but what we do before we start the exposure response, exposure therapy, is I allow them to start building on their own coping skills. So we try different things such as mindfulness, grounding, we do breathing exercises. We provide a lot of tools for their tool trunk so that they can reach out and use those coping mechanisms in the time of need during their exposure. So the stress will be there and the anxiety will be there, but we learn how to be able to cope with it, because the only way around fear is through fear. And I remember learning that long time ago when I was in therapy, is there's no special magic pill necessarily, or there's no magic way of doing it. It's just through the process of doing it is how we build that strength. And we also are able to desensitize ourselves. And if I could just use an example, like a scary movie, the first time you watch it, you know, for those who don't like scary movies, they close their eyes. The second time they might be peeking out a bit. And the third time they're like, hey, check this out. This is a really scary part. So same thing with ERP. The first time we do it, it's really scary. So we need to know that, that we're going to experience anxiety. But anxiety is what moves us often and motivates us. So we will have stress and we will have anxiety, but the benefits are far outweigh the stress and anxiety in the long term, for sure. And there's different speeds at which we can go. If people are really anxious and they come to me, Lauren, I've noticed that I get a lot of the complex cases with OCD. People have been through treatment, or they've been going doctor to doctor trying to get treatment or diagnosis. Do you know that on average, it takes 14 to 17 years for someone to get the proper treatment living with OCD and to be properly diagnosed? Far too many times people are being misdiagnosed. People are being diagnosed with schizophrenia because they think they're hearing voices. They're not hearing voices. It's their own voice telling them that they have to perform an obsession or something bad will happen. So we have this hypervigilance and this hyper responsibility that we carry around. So that in essence causes a lot of anxiety and stress. So I coach people to recognize OCD for what it is and to be able to separate themselves from the OCD over time. So once we get that, we get really good at that, the anxiety naturally comes down and the stress comes down. But there's times during our life where when we have stressful things happening, our anxiety will peak, definitely. It will show up. We wax and wane. We have peaks and valleys, just like anybody else. But when we're having a very stressful time, we will have our OCD a lot more prevalent. It'll be right in front of us. So we need to recognize that and be able to deal with it.
Definitely. And so when you're talking about like recognizing that, would that be like triggers? So for people to know and recognize their triggers to setting, I don't know, an episode or anxiety or OCD. So would you work with clients to help them recognize that, or do most people with OCD know what their triggers are already? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great question. Depends on where they're at with their OCD. If they've had any prior therapy with it, they'll often be able to recognize it. But sometimes the anxiety is so overwhelming that the anxiety takes over. So sometimes we have to take a step back and say, okay, what's happening right now? Your anxiety is elevated, your stress is elevated. And then we look at what's happening in their life. And sometimes they're able to identify it, and other times it takes myself to help them to recognize it. Like, okay, you've done a job change. It's the time of year, the holidays, it might be around their work environment. So sometimes we work together on recognizing it. And then more importantly, okay, now we've recognized what's happening. What are we going to do about it? So sometimes we have to course correct. Often I'm in contact with everybody that I work with. I have a few different programs. I have a 10-week WIN program where we meet every week for 30 minutes and we work through the exposure. Once we get the snapshot in that foundation, we create that list, and we start working on the lowest anxiety provoking and move up. And we work together very consistently, and we build momentum during that time. So they're able to recognize that stress and anxiety, and we're able to seek intervention right away, because there's nothing worse than going weeks on end doing the exposure and doing it maybe not so properly, or we can maybe tweak it a bit to get through the anxiety and the stress, or take a step back and just work on the current things and not keep going up the ladder of the hierarchy. And I always say that when we know we can move beyond what we're working on is about when the anxiety comes down by about 50%. Then we know we can add something else to the list. But sometimes that can take weeks, sometimes it can take days, depending on the person. So yeah, it's, life's happening all around us. Sometimes we're just putting out little fires because there's situations that are occurring in our life.
Yeah.
Unlike anybody, right? Even people not living with OCD, but there is a high comorbidity. We call it comorbidity when there's 2 or more diagnoses. So it's not uncommon for someone to be diagnosed with OCD and anxiety disorder and depression. So I'm often working with people that have 3 diagnoses. But the beauty is, once you learn CBT and ERP, we can apply that with every one of those types. We can put it into OCD, we can put it into anxiety and depression. So that's the beauty.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
So how do you, or how does someone with OCD deal with boundaries? Is that something that you might struggle with?
Yeah, boundaries is, there's 2 parts. When I think about boundaries, I think about also people who are enablers. So I'll speak first to answer your question about boundaries. Sometimes we have to set real firm boundaries with ourselves. When I'm coaching people, a lot of times they have, they don't recognize the boundaries sometimes. And if they don't set the boundaries, that can trigger more OCD, more anxiety, and more depression, all or any of the above. I mentioned because we have limits to what we can do for others. And often we're caregivers, we're people pleasers. We want to say yes to everything. And I love, I forget where I heard this quote. I think it was Lisa Nichols. She said, "No is a complete sentence." And I thought, wow, that just gave me God bumps, as Nick would say, right? That's so powerful, that one statement. No is a complete sentence. How many of us say, "Oh no, I'd love to do that, but I have da da da." And instead of that, we build this, I work with people to build their self-esteem and their self-confidence. This flows into many aspects of the people's lives where they can say no and not have a reason, not feel guilty about saying no, because the boundaries have to be set in our personal life, in our work life, and other areas of our life, right? So boundaries is really important, because if we don't take good self-care and we don't set the boundaries, then we're not going to have the opportunity or the energy or motivation to work through the ERP. Right? So self-care is important. The second piece is the enabling. We call it enabling when we have our family, our friends, our colleagues do things for us, or we seek reassurance from them. And so I'll give you an example. When I was checking all my appliances, sometimes I would be late for work, or it would take me 20 minutes more, an hour more to get out of the house because I'm checking all the plugins, I'm checking the curling iron, the fridge, the stove. And then even after I checked it multiple times, I would get my husband to check it. I'd be in tears and say, "Please, honey, just check the stove one more time," just so that, again, a catastrophic event doesn't happen and our house doesn't burn down or my dog gets injured in a fire. So when we get people to do our rituals for us, because that's in essence what we're doing, after we're done checking, or we say we're not checking, we'll get someone else to check or get someone to reassure us. A big thing right now is relationship OCD. I'm getting a lot of people coming to me with relationship OCD where they're doubting their relationship with their partners, or pedophile OCD, or those are 2 of the main ones. But so what they'll do in those situations is they'll seek reassurance from their partner that they love them, or that their partner loves them, or they love their partner. Or the pedophile thing, they will seek reassurance to make sure that they never touched a child or did something inappropriate. So the reassurance comes in every form of OCD. We are always seeking reassurance from others to make sure that everything's okay. But what enablers fail to recognize, and it's no fault of the others because we want the best for our loved one, right, living with OCD, but what they fail to recognize is that by enabling us, by doing the ritual for us, by giving us reassurance, which is a ritual in itself, it's only making our OCD worse. We're not facing it. We're not living with that uncertainty. It all comes back to we instead of little probability, we want no probability. And by doing that, enabling us provides us that reassurance. So another form of reassurance comes, I want to mention this because it's happening a lot, is reassurance is coming in the way of Googling. I have clients that are spending 6 to 8 hours a day Googling their symptoms a day. So it's wonderful when I can see them using those 6 to 8 hours on something productive or on themselves or spending time with their family or just being in the midst of themselves and loving it, not feeling compelled to go to a Google. We have so much at our fingertips now, and it's really scary when you think about it. With social media, we have access to computers, our phone, we always have that. We can always be Googling. And I tell people, no matter what you're Googling, you're either going to find something really catastrophic or you're going to seek that reassurance. But either way, it's only temporary. So we need to learn to live with just refraining from doing the compulsions.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So you mentioned self-care a couple of times. So how can you or someone who's experiencing OCD really practice self-care, and how can it help and benefit them?
Oh, such a good question. And that's anybody, not even just, aside from living with OCD or any mental illness, right? Is self-care is crucial. What I ask people to consider when we're putting together their tailor-made program, because that's what it is. It's not a cookie cutter program where everybody has to do this. I make it very tailor specific to their needs. And what I include with all of those tailor-made programs for each person is, what does self-care look like to you? Because not everyone can just sit and do deep breathing, or not everyone can do mindfulness or like a form of meditation. So I work with them on, like I mentioned earlier, providing them with lots of different tools, and then they decide what it is they're going to benefit from, or what they feel that is helping them. But it's really only through trial and error they practice to find out what that is. So self-care and I ask people to practice it every day. It's got to be a daily thing. So first thing in the morning before you get out of bed is practice your self-care by using some of the techniques. So whether it's laying in bed doing your deep breathing, we do box breathing, whether it's meditating, being mindfulness about your surroundings. Another self-care for many, because I'm spiritual, is prayer, spending time first thing in the morning in prayer. Because as you can appreciate, most people, once our feet hit the floor and we start moving, we get busy, right? So I always try to, for me personally, is spend time in bed and out of bed in prayer before I do anything else. So that's the first 20 minutes of my morning. And then I start doing other things. I might go for a walk. So for everybody, it's different, but I use a program called Therapist Aid, and they've got a lot of great resources out of that program that I share with my clients to work on self-care. And self-care can just be going to bed a half an hour earlier every night. I tell people, a lot of the people I work with are younger. So technology, getting off your computer at least 2 hours before bed, not having your cell phone in your room, no electronics, TV for some, not having TV, because they've done studies where even the blue, like the lighting and just the technology can keep us awake at night when we do go to bed. So just having a really well-balanced life, even nutrition or foods. For some people with anxiety, decreasing their caffeine intake, because the things such as pop and coffee and even certain teas, they have caffeine, and caffeine's a stimulant. So if you're already prone and you have a predisposition to anxiety, that can just exaggerate it, right? So even sometimes our lifestyle, our eating habits, and taking breaks during the day, like making sure, a lot of people are working from home. So I ask them to set a timer and block their daily schedule. So you're doing this for that long. At this time, you get up and you stretch, you go out for a walk, you do something for yourself.
Definitely. That's great. Thank you. There's a whole bunch of tips for self-care. As we know, self-care is important, because how can we help other people if we're not looking after ourselves?
True. Yes.
It's like the story of the oxygen mask on the plane. We're no anyone around us if we put the oxygen mask on ourselves first.
Yes, I love that one. That's really good.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that's why self-care is important, and it's great that you listed a whole reel of things that people may not realize is actually self-care, and it's up
Yes.
to each individual to listen to what their body is needing at that time.
Yes, and self-care. Some people look at it like some view it, Lauren, as selfish. They're being selfish because they're taking time for themselves. But you said it just so precisely, is if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of other people. That's the bottom line. So a lot of people with anxiety, I really have to spend some time in that area, because they're people pleasers. They're always trying to please others. So we spend a lot of time on, this is what you need to do to, even with people with children. I had one client more recently. She gets up and the first thing she's doing is caring for her children and getting them ready. So we've got a plan now where she gets up a half an hour earlier. So she just has her own me time before the children get up. Sometimes they still get up. It's hard to control, right? But at least she knows as soon as she gets up, it eases your mind too, because you've got that downtime and you've got that calminess, right? If you wake up and you've got all these things to do, that whole fight or flight mechanism comes into play sometimes, and you're just like moving fast, and you're not even taking time to think about things and take time for yourself. So yeah, very important.
Definitely. Thank you for that. So you mentioned prayer, so the audience already knows that this channel is Mindful of Christ. So I talk a lot about mental health and faith, and that's the core of it. So you've mentioned prayer, you've mentioned faith. So personally, how does your faith help you with the OCD?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Because, not everyone's, comfortable talking about it, but I'm very open with it. I have my dog's just behind me here. I'm just going to let him into a room. Just a moment. There you go. Sorry about that. So yeah, my faith is very strong. I've had OCD. When I look back, I was diagnosed about 28 years ago, but I had OCD since I was a young child. And when I was about 6 years old, I grew up in a very small paper mill town in Dryden, Ontario. And I remember going to church by myself. In those days, I would just walk to church by myself. And I've been very spiritual since I was a young child, but I always believed in God. I always believed in the Holy Spirit, in Mama Mary. We worship as Catholics, Virgin Mary. And so I never doubted. Even though OCD is a doubting disease, and I doubted many things, and I still continue to periodically with my OCD illness, but I never doubted my faith, never. I always knew God was there, even through the tough times. I knew that I was being led by the Holy Spirit. And I always this is my philosophy, is even in times of difficulty, I always try to take out a lesson from that. Like I always say to myself, what could I learn from this? Yes, this was unfortunate, but we have a good and glorious God, and I know that He's with us. So when I'm having difficulty, even with my exposure, when I was doing things that I really didn't want to do, I used to pray about it, and I always knew that He was present. So He is the one who's helped me through it all, and He'll always be there. So I'm very spiritual in that way. And I see, even during the pandemic, when I started this opportunity to go virtually and work with other people all over the world, I was scared. I didn't feel confident in the sense that I would be able to reach out and help people, but He's the one who's directing me, and He's in the driver's seat, and he leads me to places that I never thought I would be. So yes, I believe He's always present.
That's incredible. Thanks, Sandra. So
You're
we're
welcome.
coming to an end now. So before we finish, would you like to share with the viewers how they can get in contact with you and where they can find your work and find out more about you?
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm the OCD coach. So if you go to my website, www.the, make sure you put the, theocdcoach.com, you'll find all my information there, my story, my blogs, my different programs that I offer people. And they can also reach out by email, info@theocdcoach.com, and my phone number, 1204-295-4408. And I really enjoy talking to people. So if you want to pick up the phone and just give me a call, I do have 15-minute free consults. So if you're out there and listening and wondering, is this something, maybe you don't even know what to do or the first step, just get on a call or book a 15-minute session with me, and we can at least start the process and see if this is a good fit for you. And if not, what might be. So I'm always willing to help. So I want to thank you, Lauren, for your time and the opportunity, because it's through these kind of platforms that we can reach the masses, right? We don't know who's out there living a silent life of desperation that might need to hear this today. And God willing, we've done that today, hopefully.
Exactly. Brilliant. Thank you. You're very welcome. And I will put all your links in the description. So
Okay.
anyone who wants to get in contact with Sandra, then just check out the description. I will put the links in there. So thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you giving up part of your Saturday to be with me and have a chat.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And if you liked this video and you want to see more videos, then do hit the subscribe button and share and like it if you did. So anyway, enjoy your day. God bless, and see you next time.